A woman abandons a dog with puppies tied to a tree. It seemed like a cruel and inevitable fate, but something happened that no one could predict. The ancient trees of the Appalachian National Forest stood as silent witnesses to countless stories, their branches weaving shadows across the dirt road where Amanda Blake's pickup truck wound its way through the wilderness. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy, casting dappled light on the vehicle's worn exterior, much like the weathered reputation of its driver. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's keep going. Amanda Blake wasn't just any dog breeder. She was a legend in the competitive world of professional dog training. Her name carried weight in circles where performance meant everything, where dogs were measured not by their affection, but by their ability to meet the most demanding standards. Her facility had produced some of the most sought-after security and competition dogs in the country, each one a testament to her unwavering pursuit of perfection. In the truck's cargo area, Daisy, a magnificent German shepherd, lay beside her 6 newborn puppies. The mother dog's gentle brown eyes reflected a softness that Amanda had come to despise. It was this very trait that had sealed their fate. The puppies, merely weeks old, had already failed to display the aggressive instincts Amanda demanded from her breeding program. So in her eyes they were worthless, a genetic dead end that threatened to taint her carefully cultivated bloodlines. The truck jolted over a particularly rough patch of road, and Daisy's protective instinct kicked in as she curled her body tighter around her puppies. Amanda caught the movement in her rearview mirror and frowned. Such maternal devotion was precisely what she didn't want in her breeding stock. Her dogs needed to be warriors, not nurturers. As she drove deeper into the forest, Amanda's mind wandered to the upcoming international competition where 3 of her other dogs would be competing. She couldn't afford any distractions, any weaknesses in her program. The puppy's gentle nature was like a stain on her reputation, one she intended to eliminate far from prying eyes. The forest grew denser, the shadows longer, and the silence more profound. Amanda had chosen this spot carefully, a clearing so remote that even the most determined hiker would never stumble upon it. She had discovered it years ago during one of her training exercises, and its isolation had served her purposes more than once. When she finally reached the clearing, Amanda parked the truck and sat for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel. The engine's quiet rumble was the only sound breaking the forest's hushed atmosphere. She checked her watch. She had exactly 45 minutes to complete her task and make it back for an important call with a potential buyer from Europe. With practiced efficiency, Amanda stepped out of the truck. The forest air was crisp, carrying the first hints of autumn's approach. She moved to the truck's rear, where Daisy's tail wagged hopefully at the sight of her handler. The dog's trust made Amanda's jaw clench, another sign of weakness that had no place in her program. She pulled out a length of thick rope from behind the driver's seat, its coarse fibers worn smooth from use. Daisy followed her commands without hesitation, as Amanda led her to a sturdy oak tree at the clearing's edge. The puppies, still unsteady on their feet, tumbled after their mother, squeaking and stumbling in the thick grass. Amanda worked quickly, securing Daisy to the tree with knots that would hold against any initial attempts to break free. The German shepherd watched her with confused eyes, still trusting, still loyal, even as instinct began to whisper that something was wrong. Amanda placed the puppies on the ground near their mother, their tiny bodies huddled together for warmth. As she stepped back, Daisy's first whimper echoed through the clearing. It was a sound of uncertainty, of beginning comprehension. Amanda turned away, her boots crushing the grass beneath her feet as she walked back to the truck. She could feel Daisy's eyes on her back, could hear the increasing distress in her whines, but she didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. The truck's engine roared to life, and Amanda shifted into reverse. In her rearview mirror, she caught one last glimpse of the scene she was leaving behind. Daisy straining against the rope, her puppies crowding around her feet, and the vast, indifferent forest stretching in every direction. As she drove away, the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the truck's metal roof like accusatory fingers. The forest swallowed the sound of her departure, leaving behind a silence broken only by Daisy's increasingly desperate attempts to understand what had happened. The German shepherd's world once defined by the certainty of human care and routine, had shattered in the space of a few minutes. As the rain began to fall more heavily, Daisy curled her body around her puppies, offering what protection she could against the gathering darkness and the unknown dangers that lurked in the shadows of the ancient forest. The rain that had started as a gentle patter soon transformed into a relentless downpour, turning the forest floor into a treacherous mix of mud and fallen leaves. Daisy, still tethered to the oak tree, used her body as a makeshift shelter for her puppies, who huddled beneath her, seeking warmth and protection from the increasingly hostile elements. As darkness descended upon the forest, the sounds changed. The gentle rustle of leaves gave way to mysterious creaks and distant howls that made Daisy's ears prick forward. Her training as a guard dog had made her acutely aware of potential threats, but now that awareness was amplified by her maternal instincts. Every shadow, every unexpected noise could mean danger for her vulnerable puppies. The rope around her neck was thick and sturdy, clearly chosen for its strength. Daisy had been trained to respect restraints, but something deep within her, something more primal than any training, told her that she needed to break free. She began to work at the rope with her teeth, carefully at first, testing its strength while keeping most of her body curved around her whimpering puppies. The night grew colder, and the wind picked up, sending sheets of rain sideways through the trees. Two of the puppies, smaller than their siblings, began to shiver uncontrollably despite their mother's protection. Daisy's efforts to warm them seemed increasingly futile against nature's onslaught. She redoubled her attempts to chew through the rope, even as the rough fibers cut into her gums. In the darkness, pairs of eyes began to appear, first at the edge of the clearing, then gradually closer. Wolves drawn by the scent of the vulnerable group were gathering. They moved like shadows between the trees, their movements calculated and patient. Daisy's muscles tensed as she recognized the threat, her body automatically shifting into a defensive position. The first wolf emerged from the tree line, its gray fur almost silver in the weak moonlight that occasionally broke through the clouds. It was followed by others, their movements synchronized with years of hunting experience. Daisy's growl rumbled deep in her throat, a warning that despite her bindings, she would fight to protect her young. The wolves kept their distance, but their presence was a clear reminder of the dangers that awaited in the forest. They settled into a loose circle around the clearing, content to wait. Time was on their side, and they knew it. Daisy's instincts told her that they would wait until exhaustion began to take its toll before making their move. As the night wore on, Daisy continued her work on the rope, her jaws aching from the constant effort. The wolves' patience was unnerving. They remained still, watching, their eyes reflecting the occasional glimpse of moonlight. The puppies, sensing their mother's tension, stayed unusually quiet, instinctively understanding the need for silence. The rain eventually subsided, but the cold intensified. The wet fur of the puppies dried slowly, and Daisy could feel their small bodies trembling against her. She knew they needed food. Her own hunger was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. But for now, survival meant staying put and continuing her methodical assault on the rope. In the pre-dawn hours, something larger moved through the forest. The wolves' ears perked up and their heads turned in unison toward the sound. A massive shape emerged briefly at the edge of the clearing, a brown bear, its bulk impressive even at a distance. The wolves shifted uneasily, their pack mentality warring with the respect commanded by this new arrival. The bear's presence created an unexpected dynamic. It showed no immediate interest in Daisy and her puppies, but its mere existence in the vicinity complicated the wolves' plans. The predators began to retreat, melting back into the shadows of the forest, though Daisy knew they wouldn't go far. As the first hints of dawn began to color the sky, Daisy had made significant progress on the rope. Her mouth was sore, and exhaustion pulled at every muscle, but determination drove her forward. The puppies had finally fallen into an uneasy sleep, their small bodies pressed together for warmth. The two weakest ones barely moved, their breathing shallow and labored. The forest began to wake around them. Birds started their morning songs, and small creatures rustled in the underbrush. These familiar sounds brought no comfort to Daisy. They only emphasized how far they were from the world they had known. The morning light revealed the clearing in stark detail. The muddy ground, the scattered leaves, and the tracks of the wolves who had watched through the night. Daisy knew she needed to free herself soon. The wolves would return, and the bear's presence, while temporarily helpful, was unpredictable. More importantly, her puppies needed nourishment and better shelter. The rope had begun to fray under her persistent efforts, but it would still take time to break through completely. Time that, with each passing moment, became increasingly precious. The second day in the forest brought new challenges as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The morning dew had settled on Daisy's fur, adding to the discomfort of her already exhausted body. Her jaws ached from the night-long effort to chew through the rope, but she couldn't stop. The frayed fibers of the rope were finally beginning to give way, each strand representing a small victory in her bid for freedom. The clearing looked different in the harsh light of day. Tracks in the mud told the story of the previous night's visitors, and the air carried new scents that put Daisy on edge. Her puppies had grown quieter, their usual morning enthusiasm dampened by hunger and exhaustion. The two weakest ones barely moved, their small bodies growing cooler despite their mother's constant attention. As the morning progressed, Daisy became aware of movement in the underbrush, different from the wolves, but equally concerning. Human voices carried on the wind, distant but clear enough to trigger memories of Amanda and the betrayal that had brought them here. The sounds of twigs snapping and leaves rustling suggested that hunters were moving through the forest, though still far from their location. The bear from the previous night had remained in the area, its presence marked by occasional grunts and the sound of breaking branches. Strangely, its proximity brought a measure of security, the large predator's territory keeping other threats at bay. Daisy could sense that the bear was watching, though its intentions remained unclear. By midday, the rope had weakened significantly. Daisy's persistent efforts had transformed the thick cord into a fraying mess, but the final strands proved stubborn. Each attempt to break free sent waves of pain through her jaw and neck, yet she persisted. The sound of her puppy's weak whimpers provided all the motivation she needed. The forest around them had grown unusually quiet, a silence that made Daisy's fur stand on end. Experience had taught her that such silence often preceded danger. She redoubled her efforts on the rope, working with renewed urgency. The hunters' voices had grown closer, and the scent of unfamiliar dogs tainted the air, tracking hounds, their excited barks echoing through the trees. As the afternoon wore on, Daisy's determination paid off. With one final, powerful effort, the last strands of the rope snapped. The sudden freedom almost made her lose her balance, but years of training kept her steady. For a moment she stood still, adjusting to the sensation of being unbound, while her puppies stirred at her feet. Freedom brought immediate decisions. The hunters were approaching from the east, their dogs' barks growing louder. The bear's tracks led west, toward what sounded like running water. Daisy's instincts told her that water might offer their best chance. It could hide their scent and provide needed hydration for her weakened puppies. Gathering her remaining strength, Daisy began the careful process of moving her puppies. One by one, she gently picked them up by the scruff of their necks, her maternal instincts guiding her movements. The stronger ones wiggled slightly in her grasp, while the weaker ones remained still, their survival hanging by a thread. The journey away from the clearing was slow and methodical. Daisy had to make multiple trips, moving each puppy to a safe spot before returning for another. Each journey increased the risk of detection, but she had no choice. The sound of water grew stronger as she moved west, confirming her chosen direction. As they moved deeper into the forest, the terrain became more challenging. Fallen logs and thick undergrowth forced Daisy to carefully plan each step. The bear's path had created somewhat of a trail, making their progress slightly easier, though the thought of following a predator's path brought its own concerns. The hunters' voices eventually began to fade, but Daisy knew better than to relax. Her training as a security dog had taught her about human persistence, and these forests clearly belonged to the hunters as much as to the wild animals. Every few steps, she would pause, ears forward, listening for any sign of pursuit. The afternoon light filtered through the canopy, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. Daisy's keen senses picked up new scents, water, moss, and something else that made her hackles rise. The bear was close, its massive presence apparent in broken branches and disturbed earth. Yet somehow, Its proximity felt less threatening than the distant sound of hunting dogs. As the day progressed, Daisy finally reached the source of the running water, a cold, clear stream cutting through the forest. The sight of water brought new energy to the stronger puppies, their tiny noses twitching at the fresh scent. For the first time since their abandonment, Daisy felt a glimmer of hope. The stream offered not just water, but a path forward, away from the dangers that lurked in the forest's depths. The stream provided momentary relief, its cool waters offering the first drink Daisy and her puppies had enjoyed since their abandonment. Yet the forest held no time for rest. As Daisy guided her remaining puppies along the water's edge, her trained senses remained alert to the countless dangers that surrounded them. The stream's bank was treacherous, riddled with slick rocks and uncertain footing. Daisy moved carefully, testing each step before allowing her puppies to follow. Her security training proved invaluable now, every skill learned in Amanda's facility transforming into a tool for survival. The irony wasn't lost on the forest. The very training meant to make her a perfect guard dog now served to protect the gentleness Amanda had despised. As they traveled downstream, signs of human activity became more frequent. Discarded cans, old fire pits, and disturbed vegetation told stories of regular visitors to these parts. Daisy's nose caught whiffs of unfamiliar scents, metal, oil, and something artificial that made her fur stand on end. Her instincts screamed of danger, but the need to find safe shelter drove her forward. The puppies struggled to keep pace, their tiny legs trembling with exhaustion. Every few steps, Daisy had to stop and carry them one by one, her maternal instincts warring with her need to remain vigilant. The stronger ones showed remarkable resilience, but their siblings' weakness was becoming more apparent with each passing hour. Suddenly, a glint of metal caught Daisy's eye, barely visible beneath a carpet of leaves. She froze, her body tensing as recognition dawned. Her training had exposed her to various human tools, and this one spelled danger. The trap lay partially concealed, its metal teeth waiting patiently for unsuspecting prey. As she carefully steered her puppies away, a heart-stopping snap echoed through the forest. One of her puppies, straying slightly from the path, had wandered too close to another hidden trap. The sound of its frightened yelp tore through Daisy's heart as she rushed to help. The trap had sprung, catching the small creature in its merciless grip. The puppy's cries echoed through the trees, each sound a beacon to any predator within earshot. Daisy worked frantically, her nose nudging the trap's mechanism, searching for a way to release her trapped young one. Her previous training hadn't covered this type of challenge, but desperation fueled her determination. The puppy's cries grew weaker, its small body trembling with shock and pain. The situation grew more dire as familiar heavy footsteps approached. The bear had returned. Its massive form emerged from the undergrowth, drawn by the commotion. Daisy positioned herself between the bear and her puppies, her body low and ready, despite knowing she stood little chance against such a formidable creature. But the bear's behavior remained peculiar. Instead of attacking, it observed, its intelligent eyes taking in the scene before it. The huge animal moved closer, its movement surprisingly gentle for its size. Daisy remained tense, ready to fight if necessary, even as exhaustion pulled at her muscles. The bear's presence created an unexpected consequence. Its heavy movements and scent would mask their location from other predators, particularly the wolves that had been stalking them. As Daisy continued her desperate attempt to free her trapped puppy, the bear settled nearby as if standing guard. Time became a blur of urgent attempts and mounting fear. The trap's mechanism proved stubborn, designed to hold much larger prey. Each failed attempt brought fresh waves of panic, but Daisy persisted. Her training had taught her focus under pressure, and now she channeled every ounce of that discipline into saving her young one. As the day's light began to fade, Daisy's efforts finally yielded results. The trap's grip loosened just enough for the puppy to slip free, injured, but alive. The relief was momentary, however, as the reality of their situation set in. They needed shelter, food, and a safe place for the injured puppy to recover. The bear, still maintaining its curious vigil, shifted slightly, creating a path through the undergrowth. Its behavior seemed almost intentional, as if suggesting a direction. Daisy, cradling her injured puppy carefully in her mouth, faced a critical decision. The obvious path led downstream, away from the traps, but the bear's direction offered something else, an unknown option that somehow felt right. As darkness approached, the forest's sounds began their nightly transformation. The decision couldn't wait any longer. With her injured puppy in her mouth and the others huddled close, Daisy made her choice. Sometimes survival meant trusting instincts over logic, even when those instincts led toward rather than away from what should be feared. The path the bear seemed to suggest led deeper into the forest, away from the water's edge and into terrain that grew increasingly rugged. Daisy, carrying her injured puppy, followed with cautious determination, while her other puppies stumbled along beside her. The bear moved ahead of them, its massive form creating a natural pathway through the dense undergrowth. The journey took them uphill, where the air grew thinner and the vegetation changed. Ancient trees stretched their gnarled branches overhead, creating a canopy that filtered the remaining daylight. The bear's chosen path, though challenging, seemed to avoid the worst of the rough terrain, as if the massive creature understood the limitations of its smaller followers. The injured puppy in Daisy's mouth whimpered softly with each step, but its cries had grown weaker. The trap had left its mark, and without proper care, the situation could worsen quickly. The other puppies, exhausted from their ordeal, struggled to keep pace. Their normally playful spirits had been replaced by a quiet determination that seemed beyond their tender age. As they climbed higher, the bear occasionally stopped, turning its massive head to ensure its unlikely companions were still following. Its behavior defied everything Daisy had been trained to expect from wild predators. The same forest that had presented so many dangers now seemed to be offering an unexpected alliance. The temperature dropped as they gained elevation, and the wind carried new scents, earth, decay, and something else that made the bear quicken its pace. The sound of branches breaking in the distance suggested they weren't alone in this part of the forest. The wolves, persistent in their pursuit, had picked up their trail again. The bear led them to a rocky outcropping where the ground rose sharply. Hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines was the entrance to a small cave. The bear paused, looking back at Daisy and her puppies, before entering the cave itself. For a moment, Daisy hesitated. Her training and instincts warred with each other. Entering a confined space with a wild predator went against everything she knew. But the sound of wolves growing closer made the decision for her. The cave, despite its dangers, offered shelter and protection. With careful steps, Daisy guided her puppies into the darkness. The cave's interior was surprisingly warm and dry, its floor covered with soft earth and leaves. The bear had settled near the entrance, effectively blocking both escape and intrusion. In the dim light filtering through the vine curtain, Daisy could finally examine her injured puppy properly. The trap had left deep bruises, but miraculously no bones appeared to be broken. The puppy's resilience, a trait that would have made Amanda proud in different circumstances, showed in its determined attempts to move, despite the pain. The cave's shelter allowed Daisy to focus on her puppy's immediate needs. She cleaned the injured one's wounds with gentle licks, her maternal instincts taking over. The other puppies huddled together for warmth, their small bodies finally relaxing in the relative safety of their temporary sanctuary. Outside, the wolves' howls echoed through the gathering darkness. They had tracked the group to the general area, but seemed hesitant to approach the cave. The bear's presence created a natural barrier, its mere existence keeping other predators at bay. For the first time since their abandonment, Daisy and her puppies had a chance to truly rest. As night fell completely, the cave's atmosphere changed. The bear's steady breathing created a rhythm that seemed to fill the space with an unexpected peace. The puppies, responding to the relative safety, fell into exhausted sleep. Even the injured one's whimpers subsided as it nestled against its siblings. Daisy remained alert, her training making it impossible to fully relax. She watched the cave's entrance, where moonlight filtered through the vines, creating shifting patterns on the ground. The bear's massive form remained a constant presence, its behavior continuing to challenge everything Daisy had been taught about the natural order of things. In the quiet darkness, Daisy's thoughts drifted to Amanda and the facility she had called home. The training that had shaped her into a guard dog now served a different purpose, not to meet human standards of perfection, but to protect the very gentleness that Amanda had considered a fatal flaw. The irony of this transformation wasn't lost on Daisy, whose world had shifted from the controlled environment of competitive breeding to the raw survival of the wilderness. The night deepened, bringing with it new sounds and scents. The wolves maintained their distance, their howls growing more frustrated as they realized their prey was beyond reach. Inside the cave, the unlikely alliance of domestic and wild continued its vigilant rest, each member playing a role in this strange partnership that defied natural law. Dawn broke over the forest, filtering through the cave's vine curtain with tentative rays of light. The bear had maintained its position through the night, its massive form still guarding the entrance. Daisy's puppies stirred, their small bodies seeking warmth against each other as the morning chill crept into the cave. The immediate safety of their shelter had provided rest, but hunger now gnawed at them all. The puppies, too young to understand the concept of patience, began to whimper with increasing urgency. Their cries echoed in the cave, each sound a reminder of their desperate situation. The injured puppy, though slightly stronger after a night's rest, still showed signs of distress. The bear shifted, rising to its full height and moving away from the cave entrance. Its behavior seemed to suggest it was safe to venture out. Daisy approached the entrance cautiously, her senses alert to any potential threats. The forest had changed overnight. New scents carried on the morning breeze, some familiar, others worryingly foreign. Among these new smells was something that made Daisy's hackles rise, the artificial scent of human interference. Her training had taught her to recognize various scents, and this one triggered warning signals in her mind. But the puppies' needs couldn't wait. They needed food, and they needed it soon. Guiding her puppies out of the cave, Daisy kept them close as they made their way down the slope. The bear followed at a distance, its presence still providing an umbrella of protection. The morning dew had settled on the vegetation, making the descent treacherous. Each step required careful consideration, especially with the injured puppy struggling to keep pace. As they reached lower ground, Daisy's nose led them to a clearing where the morning sun had warmed the earth. Scattered across the ground were pieces of meat, too perfectly placed to be natural. Her training screamed danger, but before she could react, one of the hungrier puppies darted forward, snatching a morsel in its mouth. Panic surged through Daisy as she recognized the threat. These were baits, placed by hunters to lure and trap animals. She quickly knocked the meat from her puppy's mouth, but some had already been swallowed. Within minutes, the puppy began to show signs of distress, its small body trembling uncontrollably. The bear, watching from the tree line, seemed to understand the urgency of the situation. It moved purposefully through the undergrowth, heading toward a patch of vegetation that grew in dappled sunlight. Daisy's attention was divided between following the bear's movement and tending to her increasingly sick puppy. The bear stopped near a cluster of plants, its massive paw surprisingly gentle as it indicated a specific herb growing among the forest floor. Daisy recognized the plant. She had encountered it during her training exercises in the wilderness. Amanda's facility had included wilderness survival scenarios, though they had never been intended for this kind of situation. Moving quickly but carefully, Daisy gathered some of the medicinal plants. Her instincts combined with her training guided her actions as she encouraged her sick puppy to chew the bitter leaves. The other puppies huddled nearby, their earlier hunger temporarily forgotten in the face of their siblings' distress. Time seemed to slow as they waited for any sign of improvement. The bear remained nearby, its presence keeping other predators at bay, while Daisy focused on her sick young one. The forest around them had grown unusually quiet, as if holding its breath along with them. The morning stretched into afternoon, each moment marked by the puppy's labored breathing. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the trembling began to subside. The medicinal plants, combined with the puppy's natural resilience, seemed to be fighting back against the poison. But their ordeal had attracted unwanted attention. In the distance, voices could be heard. The hunters had returned to check their baits. The sound of dogs barking carried through the trees, getting closer with each passing minute. Daisy knew they needed to move, but with one puppy still recovering from the trap injury and another weakened by poison, their options were limited. The bear's behavior changed suddenly, its massive head turning toward the approaching sounds. It moved with unexpected purpose, heading in the direction of the hunters. Daisy watched, confused by its actions, until understanding dawned. The bear was creating a diversion, drawing attention away from their location. With precious little time, Daisy had to make a decision. The sick puppy was showing signs of improvement, but was in no condition to travel far. The others were exhausted and hungry, their small bodies pushed to their limits. Yet staying near the poisoned clearing wasn't an option. Somewhere in these woods, there had to be a safe haven. But finding it would mean another journey into the unknown. The diversion created by the bear gave Daisy precious minutes to move her weakened family to safety. With her poisoned puppy showing signs of recovery and the injured one still limping, she began guiding them through the dense undergrowth, away from the hunters' approaching voices. Each step had to be carefully chosen, balancing the need for speed with the limitations of her exhausted puppies. The forest floor was a maze of fallen logs and thick vegetation, making their progress painfully slow. Daisy's security training had taught her to move silently, but with 6 puppies stumbling along behind her, stealth was nearly impossible. The sounds of the hunting dogs grew closer, their excited barks echoing through the trees. Suddenly, a sharp metallic glint caught Daisy's eye. Another trap, partially hidden beneath leaves and debris. The hunters had been busy, turning this section of the forest into a dangerous maze. Daisy's keen sense of smell now detected more of the artificial scent she had learned to associate with the traps, suggesting they were surrounded by these hidden threats. The sick puppy, still weak from the poisoned bait, struggled to keep up with its siblings. Daisy found herself making frequent stops, carrying first one puppy and then another, her own strength beginning to wane. The injured one whimpered softly with each step, its recovery hampered by their constant movement. Through the trees, they could hear the bear creating chaos in the distance. Its roars and the sound of breaking branches had the desired effect. The hunters' voices and their dogs' barking moved away from Daisy and her puppies, drawn to the more immediate excitement. But Daisy knew this distraction wouldn't last forever. As they pushed deeper into the forest, the terrain began to change. The ground sloped upward again, and the vegetation grew thicker. Old-growth trees towered above them, their massive trunks offering potential hiding places. Daisy's nose picked up new scents, water, moss, and something else that suggested shelter might be nearby. The sound of a rifle shot cracked through the air, causing Daisy to freeze. Her puppies huddled against her legs, their small bodies trembling. The shot had come from the direction where the bear had led the hunters, and for a moment, Daisy felt a surge of concern for their unlikely protector. The forest fell silent in the wake of the gunshot, even the birds ceasing their calls. Taking advantage of the momentary quiet, Daisy urged her puppies forward. They needed to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the hunters before the search resumed. The sick puppy had regained some strength, though its movements were still unsteady. The injured one showed remarkable resilience, keeping pace despite its hurt leg. As they climbed higher, the air grew cooler and thinner. The scent of water became stronger, suggesting a stream or spring nearby. Such a place would offer not just hydration, but also the chance to wash away their scent trail, something Daisy had learned during her training exercises. The hunters' voices eventually resumed, but they seemed more distant now. The bear's diversion had worked, leading them far enough away to give Daisy and her puppies a chance at escape. Still, she knew better than to relax her guard. These forests belonged to the hunters as much as to the wild animals, and they would not give up easily. The afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows through the trees. Daisy's keen ears picked up the sound of running water, growing louder as they approached. But mixed with the water's sound was something else, a low rumble that made her fur stand on end. The bear had returned, somehow circling back to them through the forest. Its massive form appeared through the trees, moving with surprising stealth for such a large creature. Despite the earlier gunshot, the bear appeared unharmed. It approached slowly, as if conscious of not frightening the puppies. Daisy watched as it gestured with its head toward a narrow path between 2 large boulders, a path that seemed to lead toward the sound of water. The trust that had begun to form between these unlikely allies was about to be tested again. The bear's guidance had proven reliable so far, but following it now meant committing to a path that offered no obvious escape route. Behind them, the hunters' voices had grown distant, but hadn't disappeared entirely. The path between the boulders led to a hidden grotto that seemed to exist in its own world, sheltered from the chaos of the forest below. A small waterfall cascaded down moss-covered rocks, creating a shallow pool before continuing its journey downstream. The late afternoon light filtered through the canopy above, casting dappled shadows on the water's surface. The bear's guidance had led them to what appeared to be its own sanctuary. The grotto was naturally fortified, with steep rock walls on three sides, and the waterfall creating both a barrier and an escape route. The ground was covered with soft moss and fallen leaves, creating natural bedding that would help keep the puppies warm. Daisy's puppies, exhausted from their journey, immediately began to drink from the clear pool. The water was cold and clean, free from the taint of human interference that had marked their previous water sources. The sick puppy, still showing effects from the poisoned bait, seemed to gain strength with each careful sip. The bear settled near the grotto's entrance, its massive body effectively blocking the narrow path they had used to reach this haven. Its behavior continued to defy natural law. This was clearly its territory, yet it seemed determined to share it with these unexpected guests. The predator had become a protector, though Daisy remained cautious, her training never fully letting her guard down. As evening approached, the temperature began to drop, but the grotto remained surprisingly warm. The rock walls retained heat from the day's sun, creating a microclimate that would help shelter them through the night. The injured puppy found a soft spot in the moss, its siblings huddling close for warmth and comfort. The sound of the waterfall served another purpose. It masked any noise they might make from potential threats below. Through gaps in the falling water, Daisy could observe the forest without being seen. She watched as the hunters' lights moved through the trees in the growing darkness, their search patterns becoming more erratic as frustration set in. The bear's presence had changed the dynamics of the forest. Wolves that had been stalking them now kept their distance, unwilling to challenge such a formidable guardian. Even the hunting dogs, when their barks occasionally carried up to the grotto, seemed reluctant to approach this part of the forest. As night fell completely, the grotto took on an almost magical quality. Moonlight reflected off the falling water, creating shifting patterns on the rock walls. The puppies, finally feeling secure enough to relax, began to show glimpses of their former playful nature. The sick one's condition continued to improve, while the injured puppy's limp seemed less pronounced. Daisy settled into a vigilant rest, positioning herself where she could watch both the entrance and her puppies. Her security training had taught her to never fully relax, but here in this hidden sanctuary, she allowed herself to feel a cautious optimism. The bear's unexpected alliance had given them more than just protection. It had given them a chance to heal and recover. The night deepened, and the forest sounds changed. Nocturnal creatures began their activities, but none ventured near the grotto. The bear's presence created a boundary that even the most curious wildlife respected. The hunters' lights eventually disappeared, though Daisy knew they would return with daylight. In these quiet hours, watching her puppies sleep peacefully for the first time since their abandonment, Daisy's thoughts turned to Amanda. The training that had been meant to create the perfect guard dog had instead prepared her for something entirely different: survival, adaptation, and the protection of the very gentleness that Amanda had despised. The waterfall's constant rhythm created a soothing backdrop, its sound mixing with the bear's steady breathing and the puppy's soft snores. This unlikely family, brought together by circumstance and survival, had found a moment of peace in the midst of their ongoing ordeal. But Daisy knew that their journey was far from over. The hunters would return, and the forest held countless other challenges. For now, though, in this hidden grotto under the moon's watchful eye, they had found a place to regain their strength. The sick puppy's breathing had steadied, the injured one's rest was peaceful, and their siblings had fallen into deep restorative sleep. Even the bear seemed more relaxed, though its protective posture never wavered. The peace of the grotto was shattered the next morning by distant thunder. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, their ominous approach visible through gaps in the forest canopy. The air grew heavy with the promise of a storm, and Daisy could feel the change in pressure that made her ears pop. The bear became restless, its massive form shifting uneasily at the grotto's entrance. Its behavior suggested that this wasn't just any storm approaching. Something more severe was brewing. The puppies, sensing the tension, huddled closer together, their previous night's recovery tested by this new threat. Daisy's training had included weather awareness, and every instinct told her they needed to move to higher ground. The grotto, while perfect as a temporary shelter, could become dangerous if the incoming storm brought heavy rain. The waterfall, now peaceful, could transform into a torrent that would flood their sanctuary. The sick puppy had regained much of its strength overnight, though traces of the poison's effects still lingered in its slightly unsteady gait. The injured one's leg had improved enough to bear weight, but a long journey would still prove challenging. Time was not on their side. The darkening sky and increasing wind suggested the storm would arrive sooner rather than later. The bear seemed to share Daisy's concerns. It moved away from its guard position, heading toward a barely visible path that led up the rock face behind the waterfall. The route looked treacherous, narrow ledges and steep inclines that would challenge even sure-footed adults, let alone weak puppies. Thunder rolled closer, and the first heavy drops began to fall. The decision was made for them as the waterfall's volume increased, its gentle flow becoming more forceful with each passing minute. Daisy knew they had to move now or risk being trapped. Getting the puppies up the path proved to be an enormous challenge. Each one had to be carried separately, requiring multiple trips up and down the treacherous route. The bear watched from above, occasionally indicating safer paths with surprising gentleness for such a massive creature. The sick puppy struggled the most with the climb, its recently regained strength tested by the vertical challenge. The injured one showed remarkable determination, but pain clearly marked each step. Their siblings, though stronger, were still too young for such a demanding ascent. Halfway up their climb, the storm hit with full force. Rain lashed at them sideways, making the already slippery rocks even more treacherous. Lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by deafening thunder that seemed to shake the very mountain. The puppies, terrified by the noise, became harder to manage. The waterfall below them transformed into a raging torrent, its spray reaching them even on their elevated path. The grotto they had just abandoned quickly began to fill with swirling water. Their timing had been crucial. Staying even a few minutes longer would have trapped them in an increasingly dangerous situation. The bear's presence proved invaluable during their ascent. Its bulk helped break the worst of the wind, and its knowledge of the terrain led them to small overhangs where they could rest briefly, sheltered from the storm's fury. Each rest stop allowed Daisy to ensure all her puppies were safe and accounted for. As they climbed higher, the forest below disappeared into a grey wall of rain. Lightning continued to flash, illuminating their path in stark bursts that made the shadows seem even darker. The thunder's constant rumble added to the puppies' distress, making each step of their journey more challenging. The bear led them toward what appeared to be a bigger shelter, a larger cave opening visible further up the mountainside. It would offer better protection than their current exposed position, but reaching it meant crossing an especially narrow ledge with little protection from the howling wind. The storm's intensity continued to increase, and Daisy could hear trees crashing in the forest below. The hunters would be forced to seek their own shelter, giving her family a brief reprieve from that threat. However, nature had proven to be an equally formidable challenger, testing their resilience in new and frightening ways. The new cave the bear led them to was larger and deeper than their previous shelter, its entrance partially hidden by an outcropping that helped block the worst of the wind and rain. Inside, the air was surprisingly dry and warm, a welcome refuge from the raging storm outside. Ancient rock formations created natural sections within the cave, offering multiple spaces for shelter and rest. Daisy did a quick count of her puppies as they collapsed onto the dry cave floor, their small bodies trembling from exhaustion and cold. The sick one's breathing had become labored again from the climb, while the injured puppy couldn't put any weight on its hurt leg. Their siblings, though physically stronger, were equally drained by their harrowing ascent. The bear moved deeper into the cave, its massive form disappearing momentarily into the darkness. When it returned, it was carrying something in its mouth, dried grass and leaves that it began arranging into a makeshift nest. The gesture was so unexpected, so contrary to everything Daisy had been taught about wild predators, that she could only watch in amazement. Outside, the storm continued to intensify. Lightning illuminated the cave entrance in brilliant flashes, followed by thunder that echoed off the rock walls. Through gaps in the rainfall, Daisy could see parts of the forest below. Trees swayed dangerously in the wind, and the waterfall near their former shelter had become a violent torrent. The puppies, despite their exhaustion, seemed to sense they were in a special place. The cave had clearly been the bear's den for some time. Its scent was everywhere, yet not in a threatening way. Small bones and plant matter scattered around suggested it was used for both shelter and food storage. Yet the bear was willingly sharing this intimate space with them. As the day progressed, the bear's behavior became even more remarkable. It left the cave briefly, returning with berries and edible plants in its mouth. These it placed near Daisy and the puppies, as if understanding their need for nourishment. The food, though simple, was exactly what they needed: natural, safe, and easily digestible for the weakened puppies. The sick puppy showed particular interest in some of the plants, instinctively choosing ones that seemed to help with its recovery. The injured one found a comfortable position in the nest of grass, its siblings huddling close for warmth. Their bodies, pushed to their limits by the climb, gradually relaxed in the safety of their new sanctuary. Through the afternoon, the storm's fury began to reshape the forest below. The sound of falling trees and rushing water created a constant backdrop of nature's power. Yet inside the cave, protected by solid rock and their unlikely guardian, Daisy and her family found themselves in an almost peaceful bubble. The bear's den revealed itself to be more than just a shelter. It was a testament to the creature's intelligence and adaptability. Natural ledges served as storage areas for food, while small depressions in the rock floor collected fresh water from ceiling drips. It was a perfect survival shelter, crafted by years of the bear's habitation. As evening approached, the storm showed no signs of weakening. If anything, it grew stronger, with wind that howled through the mountain passes like a living thing. The temperature dropped significantly, but the cave remained relatively warm, protected from the elements by its natural design. Daisy's security training had taught her to always be alert for threats, but here, high above the forest floor in this hidden den, she felt an unfamiliar sense of security. The bear's presence, once a source of tension, had become reassuring. Its massive form near the cave entrance served as both sentry and windbreak. The puppies, warmed by their nest of grass and each other's presence, fell into deep sleep. Even the sick one's breathing had steadied, while the injured puppy had found a position that seemed to ease its pain. Their faces, so often tight with fear and exhaustion over the past days, finally relaxed into peaceful expressions. In the growing darkness, illuminated periodically by lightning flashes, Daisy watched her unlikely protector. The bear's behavior defied everything she had been taught about the natural order of things. Yet here they were, domestic and wild, finding common ground in the face of greater challenges. The storm that raged outside had driven them to this place, but something more profound had made them stay. Morning broke over a transformed landscape. The storm had reshaped the forest below, leaving behind a changed world that bore little resemblance to what they had known before. From their elevated position in the bear's den, Daisy could see fallen trees scattered like matchsticks across the forest floor, while new streams carved paths through the undergrowth. The bear emerged from its resting spot near the cave entrance, moving to the edge of the outcropping to survey the damage. Sunlight filtered through breaks in the clouds, illuminating patches of destruction below. The waterfall that had nearly trapped them had carved a new, wider path down the mountainside, its waters still running brown with soil and debris. Daisy's puppies stirred in their nest of dried grass, their bodies stronger after a night of undisturbed rest. The sick one showed marked improvement, its eyes clearer and movements more coordinated. The injured puppy's leg, though still tender, had benefited from the extended rest. The others, their natural resilience shining through, were already exploring their new shelter with cautious curiosity. The storm had brought unexpected benefits. Fresh water collected in rocky depressions throughout the cave, providing clean drinking sources. The bear's food stores, supplemented by items blown into the cave by the wind, offered a variety of options for the hungry family. But most importantly, the storm had effectively erased their scent trails and tracks, making it nearly impossible for the hunters to track them. As the morning progressed, the bear's behavior shifted into a new pattern. It began making short trips down the mountainside, returning with fresh plants and occasionally small amounts of food. Each time it returned, it would carefully place its findings near Daisy and the puppies, as if teaching them which items were safe to eat. The puppies watched these demonstrations with increasing interest, their survival instincts developing alongside their growing strength. The sick puppy showed particular interest in certain plants the bear brought back, instinctively selecting ones that seemed to aid in its recovery. The injured one found comfort in soft moss that their protector gathered, using it to cushion its healing leg. Their siblings, growing more confident, began to mimic the bear's careful movements around the cave, learning the safest paths across the rocky floor. From their elevated position, they could see the hunters' vehicles in the distance, mere specks through the trees. The storm had blocked many of the forest roads with fallen trees and debris, effectively limiting the hunters' access to the upper regions of the forest. Nature, in its powerful display, had created a temporary barrier between Daisy's family and those who wished them harm. The bear's den proved to be an ideal recovery spot. Its elevation provided excellent visibility of potential threats, while its multiple chambers offered both shelter and escape routes if needed. The natural ventilation kept the air fresh, while the rock walls maintained a steady temperature that protected them from the external elements. As the day wore on, Daisy observed changes in her puppies that went beyond physical recovery. They moved with growing confidence, their bodies adapting to their new environment. The sick one's eyes had regained their bright alertness, while the injured puppy had begun putting more weight on its healing leg. Their siblings, no longer overwhelmed by constant fear, showed signs of their natural playfulness returning. The bear's presence had evolved from protector to teacher. It seemed to understand that survival in the wilderness required more than just strength. It required knowledge. Through its actions, it demonstrated which plants were safe, which paths were secure, and how to move silently through the forest. Daisy, her own training combining with these new lessons, found herself adapting to this wild education. Late afternoon brought new sounds from the forest below, the mechanical growl of chainsaws as cleanup crews began clearing the storm damage. The noise, though distant, served as a reminder that their sanctuary, while secure for now, wasn't permanent. The human world would eventually restore its access to these remote areas. Yet something had fundamentally changed. The puppies, once helpless products of Amanda's breeding program, were growing stronger and more capable with each passing day. Their mother's security training, combined with the bear's wilderness wisdom, was creating something unique. Creatures that could bridge the gap between domestic and wild, finding strength in both worlds. The days that followed brought new rhythms to life in the bear's den. Each morning began with careful observations of the forest below, where the aftermath of the storm continued to keep human visitors at bay. The fallen trees and washed-out paths that had initially seemed like obstacles had become natural barriers, protecting their mountain sanctuary. The bear's teaching continued in ways that amazed Daisy. It would lead them on short excursions near the cave, showing them safe paths and hidden places where food could be found. The puppies, growing stronger each day, absorbed these lessons with remarkable speed. The sick one, now almost fully recovered, showed particular aptitude for finding the medicinal plants that had aided its recovery. The injured puppy's progress was equally impressive. Though its leg would likely always carry a slight weakness, it had learned to compensate by developing exceptional balance and caution in its movements. Its siblings, protective and attentive, had formed a natural support system, always ensuring their wounded family member could keep pace. Daisy found herself integrating her security training with the bear's wilderness wisdom. Her ability to detect threats now extended beyond human dangers to include awareness of weather changes, understanding of prey movements, and recognition of safe versus dangerous plants. These combined skills made her an even more effective protector for her family. The puppy's transformation was remarkable. Gone were the helpless creatures Amanda had deemed worthless. In their place were growing, learning beings who displayed a perfect blend of their mother's trained intelligence and their wild mentor's natural wisdom. They moved with increasing confidence through their new environment, their bodies growing stronger, their minds sharper. One morning, while observing the forest below, they witnessed an unexpected scene. Amanda's truck appeared on one of the partially cleared roads, its distinctive outline visible even from their elevated position. The sight triggered something in Daisy, not fear as it once might have, but a kind of sad understanding. The world she had left behind, with its rigid standards and artificial measures of worth, seemed increasingly distant. The bear, sensing their unease at the vehicle's appearance, guided them to a new area of the mountain. This spot offered an even better vantage point while remaining completely hidden from view below. It was another lesson in survival, knowing when to move to safer ground, even when immediate danger wasn't apparent. As days passed, the puppies began developing their own unique strengths. One showed an uncanny ability to predict weather changes, while another became adept at finding edible berries and roots. The sick puppy, fully recovered, had developed an extraordinary sense for identifying healing plants. The injured one, despite its limitation, had become the most skilled at moving silently through the forest. The bear's teachings went beyond mere survival skills. It showed them how to play safely, how to enjoy their environment while remaining aware of potential dangers. The puppies learned to splash in shallow pools without leaving themselves vulnerable, to explore new areas while maintaining escape routes, to celebrate their freedom while respecting the forest's power. Their daily routine now included practice sessions where they would follow the bear through increasingly challenging terrain. Each excursion built their confidence and capabilities. They learned to cross streams without leaving scent trails, to move through dense undergrowth without making sound, to find shelter in places that seemed to offer none. Daisy watched her puppies progress with growing pride. The gentleness that Amanda had considered a fatal flaw had become their greatest strength. It allowed them to learn from an unlikely teacher, to adapt to a new way of life, to survive and thrive in circumstances that should have been impossible. The forest itself seemed to acknowledge their transformation. Other animals no longer fled at their approach, recognizing them as neither fully domestic nor completely wild, but something in between, creatures who had found their own unique place in the natural world. Even the wolves, still occasionally visible in the distance, showed a kind of respectful curiosity rather than predatory interest. The peaceful routine they had established was shattered one morning by the sound of helicopters. The mechanical whirring echoed through the mountains, sending birds scattering from the trees. From their vantage point in the bear's den, Daisy and her family watched as the aircraft hovered over different sections of the forest, their presence marking a new phase in the hunters' efforts to clear the storm damage. The bear's reaction was immediate and clear. They needed to move higher into the mountains. The helicopter's aerial perspective meant their current shelter, while hidden from ground view, could potentially be spotted from above. The puppies, now well trained in emergency responses, gathered quickly and silently, ready to follow their protector's lead. The sick puppy, fully recovered from the poison, helped guide its siblings along the path the bear indicated. The injured one, though still favoring its healed leg, moved with practiced efficiency. Months in the wilderness had transformed them all, their bodies lean and strong, their movements precise and purposeful. Their new path led them through increasingly rugged terrain. The bear chose routes that offered constant overhead coverage, using natural rock formations and dense canopy to shield them from aerial view. The skills they had learned over the past months proved invaluable, moving silently, staying hidden, finding safe paths through seemingly impossible terrain. As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner and cooler. The helicopter sounds began to fade, replaced by the whisper of wind through high-altitude pines. The bear led them to a series of interconnected ledges, each offering different advantages. Some providing excellent visibility of the lands below, others completely hidden from both ground and air observation. The puppies adapted quickly to their new environment, their earlier training coming into play. They found natural hiding spots among the rocks, their fur colors blending perfectly with the mountain stone. The injured puppy, despite its old wound, showed remarkable agility in navigating the narrow mountain paths. The others worked as a team, watching different approaches, always alert for potential threats. From their new position, they could see the full scope of human activity below. The helicopters moved in systematic patterns, clearing paths through the storm-damaged forest. Work crews followed in their wake, rebuilding roads and removing fallen trees. The wilderness was slowly being reopened to human access. The bear seemed to understand the implications of these developments. It began showing them new survival techniques suited to their higher altitude haven. The puppies learned to find water in unexpected places, to shelter from sudden mountain storms, to move safely across steep terrain. Each lesson built upon their previous knowledge, creating a comprehensive survival strategy. Daisy watched her family's continuing transformation with a mixture of pride and amazement. The puppies that Amanda had deemed too gentle for her breeding program had become masters of mountain survival. Their very gentleness, rather than being a weakness, had allowed them to form this extraordinary alliance with their wild mentor. The helicopter activity increased as the days passed, but their new location proved secure. The bear had chosen well. The ledges offered multiple escape routes and hiding places, while natural rock formations created shelter from both weather and prying eyes. The puppies moved through this vertical world with growing confidence, their bodies and minds adapting to each new challenge. The injured puppy in particular showed remarkable development. What might have been a debilitating weakness had become a source of strength as it learned to use the terrain to its advantage, finding creative paths that others might miss. Its siblings continued their protective behavior, but now it was more about cooperation than compensation. As evening approached each day, they would gather in their new shelter, their bodies tired but strong, their spirits unbroken. The bear's presence remained constant, its massive form providing both protection and reassurance. The sound of helicopters might still echo through the mountains, but up here in their elevated sanctuary, they had found a new level of security and adaptation. The high mountain sanctuary had become more than just a hiding place. It had become a true home. The ledges and caves that had initially seemed stark and challenging now felt as familiar as Amanda's facility once had, but with a crucial difference. Here, there were no artificial standards to meet, no rigid expectations to fulfill. The only measure of success was survival, and in that Daisy's family excelled. The puppies had grown remarkably, their bodies strong and agile from mountain living. The sick one, whose brush with poison had nearly claimed its life, now possessed an almost supernatural ability to identify safe food and medicinal plants. The injured puppy had developed into an expert navigator, its previous limitation transformed into a gift for finding the safest paths through treacherous terrain. One crisp morning, their routine was interrupted by an unusual sight. Through gaps in the clouds below, they spotted Amanda's truck again, but this time it wasn't alone. Several other vehicles accompanied it, and even from their elevated position, they could see people scanning the forest with binoculars. The search had intensified, but with an unexpected twist, some of the vehicles belonged to local wildlife authorities. The bear observed this development with what seemed like understanding. Its behavior suggested that these new visitors might pose a different kind of challenge. Unlike the hunters who moved with aggressive purpose, these officials followed systematic patterns, their movements more thorough and patient. Daisy's security training helped her recognize the change in search tactics. The wildlife authorities worked in grids, leaving no area unexplored. Their methods were professional and comprehensive, unlike the haphazard approaches of the previous hunters. This new development required a different response than simply hiding and waiting. The bear led them to an even higher series of ledges, where the air was thin enough to make breathing challenging. Here, the vegetation changed, becoming more sparse, but also providing less cover. However, the bear seemed to have a plan. It showed them how to use the rock colorations to their advantage, teaching them to move in ways that blended with the natural patterns of light and shadow on the mountain face. The puppies adapted to these new techniques with remarkable speed. Their bodies, already strong from months of mountain living, adjusted to the higher altitude. They learned to move only during certain times of day, when the sun's position made visibility from below more difficult. Their coordination as a group had become nearly perfect, each member understanding their role in keeping the family safe. The injured puppy's unique abilities proved especially valuable in this new environment. Its careful, thoughtful approach to movement helped the entire family navigate the exposed terrain more safely. The others had learned to follow its lead when choosing paths, trusting its instinct for finding secure routes. As days passed, the search patterns below began to shift. The wildlife authorities seemed to be focusing on specific areas, their movements suggesting they had found signs of recent animal activity. The bear watched these developments with increasing attention, its behavior indicating that they might need to make a significant change in their situation. One afternoon, as the sun began its descent behind the mountain peaks, the bear led them to a spot they hadn't visited before. It was a narrow passage between two towering rock faces, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. The path led to something unexpected, a hidden valley sheltered on all sides by steep mountain walls. The valley was like nothing they had seen before. Protected from harsh winds by its natural walls, it supported a surprisingly rich ecosystem. Small streams trickled down the rock faces, creating pools of fresh water. Vegetation grew in protected pockets, and various small animals had made this hidden world their home. The bears' introduction to this place felt different from previous moves. There was a sense of finality to it, as if their protector was showing them not just another hiding place, but a potential permanent home. The valley offered everything they needed: water, food sources, multiple escape routes, and natural shelter from both weather and observation. As they explored their new environment, Daisy realized that her family had developed into something extraordinary. They were neither fully domestic nor completely wild, but rather a unique blend of both worlds. The very qualities that Amanda had rejected, gentleness, adaptability, intelligence, had enabled them not just to survive, but to thrive in circumstances that should have been impossible. The hidden valley quickly proved to be more than just another temporary shelter. It was a paradise perfectly suited to their unique nature. Protected by towering rock walls that deterred both human intrusion and harsh weather, the valley offered a microclimate that supported a remarkable variety of life. The puppies, now nearly grown, explored their new domain with the confidence of seasoned survivors. Small caves dotted the valley walls at various heights, providing multiple shelter options. The bear showed them how each cave served different purposes, some better for storage, others for shelter during storms, and still others perfect for keeping watch over the valley floor. The family quickly established a routine, rotating between these spaces as weather and circumstances required. The sick puppy, fully recovered and now an expert in natural medicines, discovered that the valley contained an abundance of healing plants. Some were familiar from their previous experiences, while others were new varieties that grew only in this protected environment. Its skill in identifying beneficial plants had evolved into a true gift, one that continued to serve the family well. The injured puppy, whose healed leg had once seemed a liability, had developed an almost uncanny ability to predict weather changes by observing subtle signs in the valley's ecosystem. Its careful